First Things, episode number 34.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Try to be perfect. We try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Welcome back to the show. We are right in the middle of our series on assertiveness, and I hope this has been helping you. I've heard from a few of you how it is helping you, so keep in there and keep going after this new habit that we're applying, this communication style that we are learning to develop in our own life. And we are in Chapter 4 of the Assertiveness Workbook this week, which is about overcoming the belief barrier. Now, in my second episode, which is at firstthingsproductivity.com/02, you can go back and listen to that episode, which is on stinkin' thinking. And this is a foundation of much of what I talk about in these episodes. And we're going to talk about specifically stinkin' thinking as it regards to being assertive. So what are some of the stinkin' thinking that makes us communicate in a more passive style or communicate in a more aggressive style? And I would encourage you, if you haven't heard that episode, to go back to episode number 2 and listen through some of the things that I talk about in regarding to stinkin' thinking, such as the I'm blank type of stinkin' thinking, where we fill in the blank. I'm this, I'm aggressive, or I'm passive, or I'm an introvert, or I'm an extrovert. And we should be very careful when we say phrases like that. I'm anything, because many times we are labeling ourselves. And as I said in that episode, when you label me, you negate me. And when you label yourself, you negate yourself. We must learn to confront our thoughts. So many times I find in my own life, and for years and years, that I have just let thoughts just have free reign in my mind. And I will allow myself to think all sorts of stinking thinking without ever really challenging it and saying, wait a minute, what are you thinking right now? This is not true. This is not right. This is not who you want to be. This is not living up to your potential. And when you have thoughts that limit you, that negate you, that belittle you, that is stinking thinking. And you're much better than that. And you may not feel that way. Some people really struggle with these types of things of who they are as a person and how much worth they have. But you've got to challenge this. If you want to get past those types of thoughts, you've got to start with your thoughts. This is where you go after it. To me, this is where this is won or lost. It's at the threshold of the mind. That is where we go after things. We don't go after our emotions. Our emotions are pretty unruly things, and they can get us really trapped. And so many times I've talked to people, and they say, I want to quit feeling depressed, or I want to quit feeling like I'm worthless. And I always go back to, what are you thinking? Because normally, for most people, if you feel worthless, it's because you're thinking worthless thoughts. You're allowing thoughts of being worthless to dominate in your thinking, and your emotions go along with that. So many times, for many people, if you want to fix the emotion, find the thought that is feeding that emotion. Find the thought that you're allowing to go over and over in your head and just rolling that around inside of your brain, and go after the thought and replace that thought, and be quick to replace that thought with something that you know is not limiting you and not limiting your capability or your worth in any way. So again, I would definitely recommend that you go back and listen to that particular episode. If you've heard it before, maybe go back and listen to it again, because I think it would really help you when it comes to some of the things that we're talking about in these particular episodes. Now, the author starts out the chapter with some very interesting thing from more of a cognitive psychological point of view. Let me read this for you. He says, do you live in the real world? The temptation is probably to answer yes. Cognitive therapists believe, however, that the correct answer is no. And then he goes on to give an explanation of this. He says, it seems as though we see the world the way it really is, and we react to it predictably. Something good happens, for instance, and we react positively. Something bad happens, and we react negatively. Our reactions include our behavior, emotions, and some physical changes, such as smiling, flushing, shaking, relaxing, tensing, and so on. In other words, the situation in the real world causes a reaction in you. I don't know how many of you remember the movie The Matrix or the movie Inception, but I've always found those movies fascinating, very intriguing to me. The thought that what is reality and how are we defining reality for us? And I think it's a lot different than what I've usually heard, especially in college debates about what is truth and well, that's your truth and this is my truth. And, I don't want to get off into that thing. And many times that's where that argument is taken into that kind of realm. But it's more than that. What I'm fascinated about is how we perceive reality and how we look at something and how 10 people can look at the same thing and see 10 different phenomena. Now, I want you to listen to this clip from The Matrix because it talks about this very facet.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
So how do we perceive the world? That's basically what that is all about. And let me read this again from the author. He says, we don't really react to what is going on in the real world. We react to what we think is going on. Our behavior and emotions depend more on our interpretation of events than on the events themselves. If the patron ahead of us in a bank lineup reaches into his pocket, we interpret what his behavior means. If we think he is reaching for his wallet, we don't react much. If we think he is reaching for a gun, we may start to sweat. The physical act of reaching does not produce our reaction. Instead, we react to our idea of what the action means. We live in a world of beliefs and ideas. Our thoughts are influenced by what happens in the real world, but our interpretations produce most of our reactions. Let me read that one sentence again earlier. Our behavior and emotions depend more on our interpretation of events than on the events themselves. Now think about this. Many times when we become upset with someone, it's because of how we interpreted that. I cannot tell you, I can't even count on two hands how many times I've gotten upset with someone, really upset with someone, to come to find out that they didn't mean it that way, or I just totally misjudged what they were doing or what they were saying. It was my interpretation that got everything out of whack. It wasn't actually what they did. Now, granted, there are sometimes people do goofy and stupid things, and they intentionally will do goofy and stupid things. So I'm not denying that at all. But so many times, the trouble that we get into in our lives or the things that bind us up and prevent us from applying, for example, an assertive style of communication are how we interpret things. And our interpretations can come from a variety of sources. Obviously, the event itself can drive an interpretation. Somebody does something deliberately, or we see a fire in a building that we're working in. Well, obviously, that is going to drive what we interpret. There's a fire, there's danger, get out. So events definitely can influence the interpretations, but probably even more critically for us, and especially for us in these particular episodes, what really can drive interpretations is our beliefs and how we judge that, how we actually think, our paradigm, our world view, how we see ourselves. What do we think about ourselves? You should ask that question. That's a very good question to ask yourself. I would encourage you to ask. I ask that of myself as well. And I know it's an odd question. Many times in these shows, I intentionally ask you to ask yourself odd questions. And you should ask yourself, how do I view myself? What do I think about myself? Do I like myself? Do I not like myself? Do I like myself conditionally? So if I do this or do that, so if I lose weight, then I'll like myself. Or if I get a degree, or if I get a certain job, or if I make a certain amount of money, how do you view yourself? Do you like yourself? Do you like you? Do you look in the mirror and say, I'm very grateful that I am me and that I'm here on this earth? Or do you wish you were someone else? I mean, many times our superstar status, we get so infatuated with superstars in professional sports or in movies or musicians because in some secret way we want to be them. It's not just that we admire them or they inspire us, but many times we just want to be them. We don't want to be us. So you should ask yourself, what is my worldview? How do I view the world? How do I view other people? How do I view myself? How do I view work? I mean, that's an interesting question you should ask yourself. What's my perception of work? Why do you work? And this may shock you. It may not, but and maybe we'll devote an episode of this to some point. But I think humans do best when they work. Work is this incredible expression of who we are and our creativity. And if you're out of work, I wish you all the best in finding a job. Many people who may be listening to me right now are out of work or looking for income. And I do honestly wish you the best in finding something because I think it's essential that we work. I don't think, that, and some of us have this worldview. I've had it many, many times in my life. I wish I could just win the lottery so I can just sit around on a beach all day and do nothing. And that is a terrible way of looking at life. It's a worldview, it's a paradigm that says work is this evil thing. And if we could rid ourselves of work and just never do work, how much greater life would be. And my saying to that is you're only really human. You're only really expressing your creativity when you work. The problem is that many of us, or some of us at least, do work that we hate. And if you do work that you hate, well, then obviously you want to get out of work. But the problem is not the work, it's just the expression of your work. It's just this one instance of how you are expressing work. But work is an incredible outlet for our creativity, for our passions, for our expressions, for our personality. And again, the whole point, I don't want to get off on work. I would just encourage you to think about your worldview. How do you believe and what do you believe about world, about people, about yourself, about others, about work? It's all very, very important. Because how you're going to interpret an event that is before you, when you appraise an event, is going to be based on how you believe the world to be. You're going to base it on your worldview. You're going to base it upon your paradigm of life, your outlook on life. So, for instance, I go into work one day and I meet up with a friend or a coworker, and that coworker is very grumpy and snaps at me when I ask them something. Now, my worldview is going to affect how I see this. Maybe I look at this, and if I'm secure in myself and secure in the friendship that I have with this person, then I say, wow, I wonder what's wrong. Something seems to be the matter with them. Well, on the other hand, if I have a worldview that's negative toward myself and a very negative self-worth and identity, then I'm going to look at that and say, I wonder what I did. I wonder why they don't like me. Why did they suddenly not like me anymore? I will turn that whole event and interpret that as an attack toward me instead of something happening to them. And all of that is based upon a worldview. It's all based upon thoughts that I'm letting go in my head and interpreting those events and thinking thoughts that feed action and emotions and all these types of things. And the author mentions that there's several ways in which we develop these types of beliefs. Some of us are taught these beliefs. Our parents, our grandparents, our siblings will tell us these types of things. This is often where we can get into a lot of stinking thinking of thoughts like you're worthless or you can't do this or you're not pretty enough. I've seen many kids that were raised around parents who had very big problems with their worth and how they looked, and it transferred over to the kids. So the kids started seeing themselves as that way. The parents never said that to their kids. They were always loving, but they used their parents as a mirror, and they saw, wow, if my mother has a big problem with her looks and her weight, then I must have the same thing. I must be the same way, or this is how I'm going to view life. So it can come to us very indirectly. We may have the greatest parents in the world, but if our parents really struggled with some of these identity crises, it could be passed down to us as well because we just absorbed that and thought this is what's normal. It's just normal for me to question myself or to belittle myself because they did themselves and therefore I must do myself the same way. And that's where the second thing we can pick up beliefs by example. So if your father, for instance, was scared to death of thunderstorms, you may find that you're scared to death of thunderstorms. You pick that up by example. If you were around people who were very aggressive, you may find yourself being very aggressive. In fact, it's very interesting, and there's been research on this, that when people hang around aggressive people, they do typically take upon themselves some of those habits. Even passive people will become more aggressive. And they've done these studies with children as well, that if you put very passive children around more aggressive children, the passive children will start becoming more aggressive. They will start picking up the habits of those around them. And these are where our beliefs can come in, that we can pick up beliefs by example as well. And we can also pick up our beliefs through our own experiences. So we've had our experiences, and therefore we lock that in as our identity or our worldview. So if you are used to having relationships that fail, then you start aligning yourself with the belief that you are a failure or that you will always fail in relationships. Or if you're around people that act a certain way and they're very passive aggressive, and if they do certain things that are passive aggressive and then you meet someone who happens to do this characteristic, then you may automatically say, well, you're just that way, or you're automatically going to reject me. I mean, all these things come through a lot of different variety of means. We said this in the fear of failure episode, that I must be perfect, otherwise I'm a failure. And many people don't express it that extreme. Yet how often many of us will avoid even little mistakes, or we'll feel very ashamed if we make a mistake, or we won't even try new activities because we fear making a mistake. These perfectionistic standards, this is a stinking thinking. This is a belief that many of us have adopted And we all know. I mean, I don't think I could probably sit across from anyone listening to me right now and ask you, can you be perfect? And I would almost bet 100% of you would probably say, no, we're always going to kind of mess up from time to time. Mistakes are just normal. You're never going to, make 100% on every single thing. But yet, how many of us still fall trapped to that type of thing? It's amazing. It's our worldview. It's our paradigm of life. This almost haunting feeling in the back of who we are that says we must be perfect. This is the standard by which I will feel good about myself. And if I'm not perfect, then I'm less of a person. And this is why we can't embrace failure. And again, I have a whole episode about the fear of failure where I really talk about this. And I would encourage you, if you haven't heard that, to go back and listen to that particular episode as well. That's going to be episode number 10, firstthingsproductivity.com/10, the performance trap, confronting the fear of failure. And also episode 12 is another one, firstthingsproductivity.com/12, where I talk about the paralysis by analysis, perfectionism, what's so wrong about being so good. So go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't heard those before. So now, let's get into some fun things. Well, they may not be that fun. It just depends on your point of view, but let's talk about some specific stinking thinking when it comes to being passive or passive and aggressive type of styles. And I don't know this for sure. I haven't talked to the author of this book, but I have a feeling that this author, probably like me, has dealt more with passive styles of communication than maybe aggressive styles, because he has at least 3 times as many stinking thinking examples of passive styles than he does of the aggressive style. So those of you who listen to me that deal with more of these aggressive styles of communication, that you are trying to come back to more of an assertive, I would really be interested if there's some things that he left out. I don't really have a lot of experience in the aggressive style, and I agree with the ones that he listed, but they're just very few, and I feel like there has to be more than what he listed. But for those of you who are listening to me, who have a passive style of communication as your dominant style of communication, let me go through several examples of stinking thinking. Very first one, that assertiveness means getting your way all of the time. And this is a belief that some of us have that keeps us from being assertive, because we think, oh, this is what assertiveness means. It means that I have to get my way all of the time. And either I realize I can't, that's totally unrealistic, and so why do this? Or it feels like I'm manipulating, because if you believe it's about getting your way all the time, well, we know that some battles are going to be horrendous to fight to get our way. So what does that mean? I have to manipulate people. I have to be rude to people. I have to be aggressive. See, what this belief basically is saying is it's confusing assertiveness with aggression. It's basically saying that that's what assertiveness is, that assertiveness is aggression, that it means I must get my way. And we've said this many times. We've got to get rid of that stinking thinking. Assertiveness does not mean that you're going to get your way. You will never get your way all of the time. That is not what it's about. Assertiveness means that you are going to basically give yourself the dignity of choice while allowing others to have the dignity of choice. You are going to be at equal footing with people. So you're not going to be a person's slave, but you're also not going to be their master. You're not going to enslave people to you, and you're not going to be enslaved to them. This is a true freedom, an emancipation proclamation that you are establishing over everyone in your life, including yourself. It's not forcing people to do anything. It's not forcing people to do it your way. In fact, many times you may find that you never get your own way, that it never goes the way you want it to go. And if you're in a role like in your job, that may happen most of the time. I've seen this many, many times. In fact, I went through a project not too recently where I told them they had massive problems and were spending lots of money to try to fix it. Well, I actually told them they were going to have these problems 6 months prior to them having these problems. They didn't listen to me. They kept doing what they wanted to do anyway. And that's okay. I'm not mad at them. I'm not passively, aggressively in the background saying, you did this to yourself. I just literally spoke my mind and allowed them the dignity of making the choice, and they had to live with the consequences of that. And guess what? I was there to help them fix it because it wasn't a matter of identity. It wasn't a matter of I told you so. That's assertiveness. Assertiveness gets in there and is not ashamed to say, here's what I think, and if you don't go this way, I respect your choice. It's not about getting your own way. And this is a thought we have to get out of our head. So if you think this, if this is preventing you from being assertive in your life, that it means I must get my, no, it doesn't mean that. Okay, so you can dispel that from your mind right now. It does not mean that you must get your way, and it doesn't mean you will get your way. And it's not about manipulation. It's not about guilting people at all. Second belief, that being assertive means that you have to be selfish. Now, many of us have a problem with this belief, because if you think that what I'm saying about being assertive is that you have to be selfish and it's all about you, well, that kind of goes back to the previous one, where you're mixing up assertiveness with aggressiveness. And I would say that aggressiveness styles is all about that. Being aggressive is all about me, me, me. Cater to my needs. Do what I am telling you to do. And that's not what it means. But many of us think that's what it means. And therefore, we're scared of being assertive because we fear that it is about being selfish and being rude. And some of us, quite frankly, have a worldview that we're ashamed of admitting what our needs are. We mentioned this last week for both men and women, but men face this many times. They're afraid of their own emotions. They're afraid of admitting need, because if you admit what you want or what you like, sometimes that can be a sign of weakness to some men. Maybe we were taught as we were growing up that, to admit that you have a preference for something is being selfish, and you shouldn't be selfish. You should allow others to, and see, this is all part of assertiveness. To really embrace assertiveness, it is the one communication style that is the least selfish, because in the aggressive style, you're trying to make people your slave again, and therefore it's all about you. Whereas in the passive style, it's all about other people and never about you. So just remember that being assertive does not mean that you're being selfish. And here's a good test for you. How do you feel when you do things for people? Do you feel very happy that you did something for them? That could be serving them. And I believe that serving people is a good thing. What I don't believe is in being enslaved to someone. And if you do something and you feel resentful, you feel abused, you feel angry, then you're doing it for the wrong motivation. And you're being passive about this, and you're allowing other people to be selfish in your own life. Serving other people is a great thing, but you should be happy. You should be elated. You don't have to have the spotlight for something like that. You should be very fulfilled. But if you're feeling used, like I said many weeks ago, if you feel like people in your life are nothing but leeches, just sucking the very life out of you all the time, then you are dealing with a passive style of communication. And it has nothing to do with being selfish that you are assertive. Remember, assertiveness is mutual respect, where you are not only just saying what you would like or what you see, but you're giving people that right as well. And that is not being selfish. That is actually being very respectful for everyone involved in the process. The third type of stinking thinking is that passivity is the way to be loved. Many of us are raised with this thought that the only way people will like us, the only way people will accept us, is if we do what they want, or if all we do is serve as a mirror reflecting back what they like. So where would you like to go and eat? And we mentioned this a few weeks ago, and someone recommends a restaurant that you hate, and you say, oh, sure, that'd be great. Well, you're lying. It's not great. You don't like it. And you feel like this is a way to be liked, to be accepted, to be loved. I mean, I've seen this so many times. I was with someone one time, and we were around someone that was really high up in this particular organization. And I knew this person hated this restaurant. And this vice president basically said, hey, why don't we go eat at such and such a place? And I know from talking to this other person, they hated it. We used to criticize it all the time and poke fun at it. And this person, to my astonishment, says, oh, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Let's go there. And I'm sitting there thinking, what on earth are you saying? Because I know just a week ago you were talking about how that was the worst place you've ever eaten. And it was all about acceptance. This person wanted to be liked by the vice president. And he felt like, to be honest, would mean that he wouldn't be liked. He would be rejected. It goes back to this worldview of how we gain our acceptance. And for some of us, quite honestly, this can come from very early in life, from school teachers like in kindergarten, or from our parents or siblings or grandparents, that it was all about obedience, being a good child and doing what you're told and eating your vegetables and taking your nap basically made you into someone that was worth loving. And that is how it developed for some of us, that we felt like passivity was the way to be loved. And I'm telling you, that's not the case. It is a form of stinking thinking. Really, assertiveness is the way to really build relationships. So in the case of, and I know it's tough, okay, let's go back to the restaurant example with this guy and the vice president. This vice president said, hey, I've really been wanting to go there. Could we go there to eat? And what would you do? Well, an assertiveness would say, I understand that you would love to go there, but to be quite honest, I don't really like going there. I don't really like the food at all. Now, then you could leave it and see what they say, Or you could offer a win-win solution. We've talked about this before in the show. You could say, hey, instead, why don't we go here because they serve a similar type of food and I think you would really like it. Well, then what's the worst case? They can come back and say, no, I really want to go here. And you could say, that's fine. I just want you to know I'm not going to probably eat. So don't be offended by that. I just really don't like the restaurant. But if you would like to go there, then I would be happy to take you. See, that's being assertive. You're not trying to manipulate them to get your way, to go to your favorite restaurant. You're not being passive and just going along with it so you can be accepted. You're working for a win-win type of situation. So passivity is not the way to be loved. Here's another example of stinking thinking. I am only worthwhile as long as I am doing something for someone else. We mentioned this last week. This is a trap that many women face as well, that your value on this planet is if you're doing something for someone else. It can't be for you. So if you're doing something for yourself, that's being selfish again. You need to be doing for someone else. You need to be doing something for someone else. And the key word here is only. Because notice what I said the stinking thinking is. I didn't say that I am worthwhile as long as I am doing something for someone else. I said that I am only worthwhile as long as I'm doing something for someone else. That word only is the word that really sinks this into the stinking thinking category. It's good to do things for other people. I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to go and do community events and help people and give money and give of your time and do things. I do that, and I know many of you do that as well. But quite frankly, many of us feel guilty. We feel worthless. We feel selfish if you're doing something for you. And we constantly have this nagging feeling like I need to be doing something for someone else. And we feel guilty for doing something for our own sake. We talked about this in the procrastination episode. This is a trap that gets us in procrastination as well because we do not take time for ourselves. We don't schedule time away for ourselves for things that really rejuvenate us, that recreate ourselves, recreation. And as a result, we burn out. And it ties into this as well, that we feel our purpose in life is to give into other people's requests every single time, because otherwise we have no worth. This is the only basis of our identity, is that we are doing something for someone else. Another common belief, that the way I get acceptance, the way I'm appreciated, is to give and give and give and give and give. I mean, this is the only way in which we are appreciated. And I know many of us would never say this. We would never in a million years admit this. But basically what our belief is when we accept this is we're trying to buy people's love. We're trying to buy their acceptance. We're trying to buy their affection. If I give and I do what they want me to do, then they will like me. Then I will have this roadway by which to receive their love and their acceptance. If I do this for them, they will pay me back with love. They will pay me back by accepting me. They will pay me back with a job. They will pay me back in a variety of ways. We believe this, and this is a trap that keeps us back from an assertive style of communication. How about this one? Oh, wow, this is a big one, especially for me. It's impolite to disagree. How many times have you thought that, especially if you have a very dominant passive style of communication? It's impolite to disagree. And if you really believe that, it will trap you from being more assertive in your life. Basically, we sit in silence and allow whoever is there to express their view first. And when they express it, they basically set the tone for the entire conversation. And then to interject my thoughts or my wishes or my feelings about things can feel quite awkward because maybe it's in contradiction to that. And I feel like it's impolite to disagree. And one reason why we feel that way is, again, we have this misunderstanding in our lives that to voice our opinion means that we must convince someone else of that. We either need to convince them of what we're saying, or we need to turn them into what we're saying. So if we're having a conversation and I say, this is what I feel about this, many of us are trapped by this feeling that we must convince people, that we must make them understand our position, and it drives us crazy to have that acknowledgement that they understand us. We need that acknowledgement. Oh, I get you. I understand what you're saying. And many of us worry about that to the point that we don't want to voice our opinion because we feel like it has to be there. We dread someone saying, I don't understand what you're saying. That drives some of us crazy. Oh, you must understand what I'm saying. And the fact is, no, you don't have to get people to understand what you're saying. You can voice your opinion, and if somebody doesn't understand you, it's quite okay. It's not necessary that they understand you. Now, if it's someone you really care about, or they ask you, well, then you could try to explain what, hey, Brandon, what did you mean by that? I didn't quite get that. Can you elaborate more on what you meant by that? Okay, sure. Here's kind of what I was thinking. Or if they don't ask you, then don't worry about it. At least you had your say. Then the other side of that is this gnawing feeling, again, going back to aggressive. We're confusing assertiveness with aggressiveness, and we think that to voice my opinion means that I must change their minds. And if you have this as your worldview, then it makes it very hard to be assertive because, again, you think that to express your opinion about something means that you must change them, and that means you may have to manipulate them and guilt them and do all these other types of things. It doesn't mean that at all. To be assertive does not mean manipulation, and therefore it's not impolite to disagree. Now, how you disagree with someone can be impolite, because if you disagree with someone from a more aggressive style, where you're being rude to them and you're using condescending language or tone with them, yes, it may be impolite, but I'm here to tell you that you can be the nicest, most sincere person and disagree with someone. And I've told you, I've been fortunate to have a person in my life that wasn't in my life very long, but it was a boss that I had who was just one of the greatest persons I ever knew. And this person could literally tell you the worst news and you would feel like, I feel great. It was the weirdest feeling I've ever had, that this person could sit and say, I don't really think that's the best path that we should take, but they would say it in such a way that I really felt amazing. I felt like I was valued. I felt like I was worth incredible value to this person. And I realized later that they had just disagreed with everything I told them. It was how they did it. So I'm here to tell you, we're not going to talk specifically about this. We'll get into this maybe in some later episodes as we get later into this book. But I'm here to tell you it is possible to be extremely polite and totally disagree with someone. And it is possible to do that. Another stinking thinking, that if others disagree with me, then I must be wrong. And let me quote this straight from the book. He says, many people grow up feeling that their own ideas and opinions don't matter, or that those of others are always better. Do you usually wait for others to express their view before you express yours? If they have views different from yours, do you feel embarrassed or change your opinion? Do you feel that you have no right to have an opinion? Having a healthy respect for your own attitudes will allow you to think about and weigh what others say rather than automatically assuming they are correct. And I love this perspective. I don't know have you ever thought about the fact that by not voicing your opinion, and this may take you a while to think about. So if you disagree with me, if you think, Brandon, you've gone way into the looniest point of view. I've heard you say some crazy things, but now this is the craziest thing I've ever heard you say before. And if that's the case, then go think about it. Just put it on a shelf. Think about it. Let it see if it makes sense to you. But have you ever considered the fact that when you do not voice your opinion, when you are being passive, you are actually hurting the relationship. You are actually hating the other person. You aren't respecting that other person. You aren't respecting them by really engaging with what they say, by just passively agreeing with them. That isn't loving someone else. That isn't liking someone else. That isn't being respectful to someone else. If you're not fully engaging them, go and think about this, because I don't want to press it too hard. If you're not actively engaging someone, and you're not actively engaging someone if you're just passively agreeing with them, you're not really loving them. You're not really engaged with them in a relationship. And you only do that by assertiveness. You certainly don't do that by aggressiveness or by being passive-aggressive, and you don't do that by being passive either. Another stinking thinking, I have to do everything I am asked to do. Many of us think this. We have this belief, this worldview. I have to do everything I'm asked to do. I don't feel like I can say no. Brandon and I honestly don't feel like I can say no. People come and they ask me things and I don't feel like I can say no to them. Well, I would ask you why. Why do you feel like you have to do everything that's asked of you? Why do you feel like you can't say no? And again, it goes back to the other thing that I was talking about earlier. Well, I feel like I need to be a servant to people. Well, again, ask yourself, do you feel angry or resentful when other people make unreasonable requests of you? Or do you feel elated? Do you feel happy? Do you feel fulfilled in life? If you feel like people use you, abuse you, if you're angry, if you're resentful of that fact, you're not doing it for the right motivation. And honestly, if you honestly feel very fulfilled in life, and if you do something for someone else, also ask yourself what happens if they reject you because of that, or they belittle you because of that, or they condemn you because of that. If you still feel good because you did it, then you're probably in a very good mindset. But if you become unglued because, oh my gosh, they weren't happy with me and I really tried, well, you've got a stinking thinking. because that is a wrong motivation. You're seeing by how you react to these situations what's your true motivation for not saying no to that person. You were basing your identity off of that, and you saw that because when they rejected you, it unrattled you. It destroyed your emotional foundation because of that. And it's a good sign for you what your true motivation for that is. And for many of us who believe that I have to do everything I'm asked, it can become a trap. It's not really serving the other person. Like I said before, you're not really engaging a person. You're not really loving that person. Here's another example of stinking thinking. Other people can't handle my assertiveness. Now, again, all of these stinking thinking examples are more for the passive style of communication if you find yourself dominated. Like I told you earlier, I think this author has had quite a bit because all of his examples are mostly that. Other people can't handle my assertiveness. Now, unfortunately, there may be a ring of truth to this. The fact is, if you are more assertive, if you voice your opinion, if you're around other people that are passive, they may not respond. But if people are responding passively to you, you can encourage them if you're close to them. But ultimately, you've got to live your own life. And you know you want to be more assertive, then you've got to do that. And if people take your assertiveness and back away, then help them as much as you can, encourage them as much as you can, that you're wanting to know how they feel. Make it a very relaxed situation, a very relaxed environment. Make it very clear you're expressing your view and you very much welcome their view. But people have to respond the way they're going to respond. Remember, that's part of being assertive, is that you have a deep respect for other people to allow them to respond the way they choose to respond. And you can't live their life. You can only live your own. How about this one? I've actually heard this one from some people. If I start speaking up, I'll never stop. We have this fear because we've bottled up so much of our emotions that if I ever start talking, they'll never shut me up, or I'll just explode if I ever start talking. Well, the fact is that some of us have bottled up quite a bit, and there may be some truth there, that the minute you start talking or the minute you start expressing your opinion, you might dip over into the aggressive style. And this is what, again, we're mistaking, that if I start speaking, I'll never stop. And in our minds, again, we're thinking this aggressive style of communication, that I'll become enraged and angry and I'll shout and I'll be rude at people if I ever start that up. And to be honest, if you really are dominated by passive style of communication, you could be tempted over to a little bit more of the aggressive style. But remember, we're not talking about being aggressive. We're talking about being assertive. And it could take a little bit of time for you to understand the difference between those two to the point that you realize that the assertiveness is a positive approach to communication and relationships, not a negative approach. And over time, you will learn restraint and you will learn control. You will learn the ability to voice your opinion without this fear that you won't stop or this fear that you will become rude and dip into the aggressive style. It's a new territory for you. And naturally, there's some apprehension about things like that. But trust me, you will learn to stop. You won't go on forever, and you're not going to go over into the aggressive style. So quit worrying about these types of things, and don't let this type of stinking thinking stop you or thwart you away from an assertive style of communication. How about this one? It's important to be nice. Now, we mentioned this last week, especially for women, as a gender barrier, that many of us see the word nice as meaning passive. If I'm really nice to this person, I'm just going to listen to them, and I'll listen to them rant, or I'll listen to their opinion and just take it. And that's what being nice is. Or I won't say no to this person. That wouldn't be nice if I said no. And that's a misdefinition of what we mean by those terms. And I said this last week, I'll say it again. Being assertive is being nice. Assertive behavior can be nice. In fact, that may be the only time you're really nice to someone because, again, you're actively engaged with them. You're actively respecting them as well as respecting yourself. Now, remember, if you are dominated by a passive style, if you let that go too much, that anger from being used will dip into passive-aggressive styles. You're going to be tempted over into that area, and you're not going to be caring for people in that sense. You're not going to be nice for them because there may be this subconscious effort on your part to derail whatever is happening, to derail the relationship or derail the project, or you're just not going to give it 100% of who you are. You're going to hold back, and you're going to give 72% of who you are because there's this little bit inside of you that's resentful that you had to say yes to something, that you didn't say no, and you think it's being nice, but actually by giving only 72% of yourself, you're not being nice. You're being hateful. You're being disrespectful of the other person or the other party. And we think by just saying yes to it, even though we wanted to say no, it was being nice to that person. But when we said yes and we only half-heartedly do it, we're not being nice. I mean, let's be real about this. We're not being nice by doing that kind of thing. We say we're being nice, but we're not being nice at all. The only time we're truly being nice to someone is when we are living an assertive style of communication, when we can honestly respect ourselves and respect the other person at the same time. Okay, so the last one for the passive style, I told you there was a lot of these for the passive. And the last example of stinking thinking the author gives is that my opinion doesn't matter. Now, your opinion mattering is, again, another worldview. How do you view yourself? And we talked about this. We talked about this back a few episodes ago when I played you the clip about the butterfly effect, that everything you do matters. And many times we flat out don't believe that. We have this worldview that nothing about me matters. My opinion doesn't matter. Other people's opinions are better. Now, granted, again, we sometimes have evidence of this in our lives, quite frankly. We see this in some areas, and therefore we apply it to every area of our lives. You know, if it comes down to something like one of my pipes burst in my plumbing, well, I don't know anything about plumbing. I'm going to defer to someone who does know something about plumbing. If my car is smoking, I don't really know why. I'm not very literate about those things. So yes, I may take a very passive approach in something like that and allow someone to take more of the dominant role in that. Their opinion is going to matter more about me. I mean, how absurd it would be. I don't know why the car is smoking, so why do I want to voice my opinion in something like that? I mean, yes, there's times when this does apply. Unfortunately, for many of us that have gotten used to this passive style of communication, we've assumed that applies to everything in life. So if in some areas in life my opinion doesn't matter, well, it must mean that in all areas of life my opinion doesn't matter. And that simply is a bad way to see life. As we said, we do not know. We can't even fathom the importance that you have in this life. We dealt with this in a whole episode. Go back and listen to, I think, 2 episodes prior to this, where we were talking about this very thing. Yes, you matter. And yes, you may feel like you have a mundane job that doesn't affect anyone, but that is further from the truth. And go back to listen to that whole episode. We talk about this and in depth about how you really matter. And especially when it comes to your life, your actions, your family, your views are extremely important and they do matter. And you are only going to truly love yourself and the people in your life, in your family, if you actively engage with them. And your opinion matters. And doesn't mean, again, get rid of the stinking thinking that means that everyone has to do what you want. And that's what it's all about. It's not about that. It may be that you don't do what you originally wanted. It's about expressing it. It's about respecting yourself and other people to actively engage with them and then work on finding win-win solutions in your life. Now, what about some of the stinking thinking when it comes to aggressive styles of communication? Well, one of those is I'm entitled to be angry. Let me read this from the author. He says, of course you are entitled to be angry. You are entitled to any emotion you feel. You also have the right to express it and rant and rave all you like. The question is this: will it bring you closer to your goals or take you further away from them? Many people who say they are entitled to be angry really mean I'm entitled to get what I want by expressing my anger, or I'm entitled to explode with anger and have everyone else be completely supportive. But these beliefs aren't true at all. Expressing anger aggressively will seldom accomplish what we want. Instead, it usually takes us further away from our goals. This may be unjust, but that's just the way it is. There's no need to feel guilty for being angry. Anger is a normal emotion. But if you really want what you think you want, you may have to find another way of accomplishing it. It's not about manipulation. It's about communication. It's about relationship. Second stinking belief: if I'm not aggressive, nothing will happen. I've had someone say this before to me, Brandon, you just don't get it. If I'm not rude to people, they just won't do it. They'll just walk all over me, so I have to be rude to them. And I'll give them that. Being rude, being aggressive will oftentimes get things done in the short run. But what it does is it's like a war zone that's left behind. You leave people resentful. You undermine and don't respect their wishes or what they think. You get into employment situations. You get people that quit. You get people that, maybe even worse, that become passive aggressive because of your aggressive style. They start sabotaging projects. Your reputation goes down the toilet because people don't like you and you have a reputation of being an aggressive, angry, rude type of person, all your relationships suffer. Your family will suffer from that type of environment because you're not really engaging them. You're the dictator in their lives. And sure, your aggressive style is making things happen, but there's no relationship that's being built. You are just the king or the queen of the castle, and everyone becomes your subject. And that is not a way to build deep, lasting relationships with anybody. Or how about this stinking thinking? Wow, I've heard this one a lot. Well, Brandon, honesty is the best policy. And again, it's amazing how many of these stinking thinking has a ring of truth to it. Yes, honesty is a very good thing. We should be honest with people. But many of us, especially who deal with an aggressive style of communication, use honesty as an excuse for being aggressive. And they say, well, that was just the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That is just the craziest, most insane thing I've ever heard. And then they'll say, well, don't get mad at me. I'm just being honest. Or you heard people say, just saying, you're kind of getting a little pudgy there, but, just saying, what is that? Just saying. Or don't be mad. I'm just being honest. They're using honesty as a way of manipulation. They're using honesty as a way of being rude and being aggressive. And only you can say, if you said those types of things, only you can say why you said these things. Why did you say that to those particular people or those particular instances? Was there any tinge, any hint of hurtful things in what you meant? Did you mean to hurt? Did you mean to elate yourself? Many times just making ourselves feel better, because if I put someone else down, it makes me feel better. That dominated feeling of feeling better is actually coming at the expense of making someone feel worse. And that's why we said what we did. We weren't really being honest. Yeah, we may have been honest in some degree, but we were using that to be aggressive. We were using that as a weapon. As the author says, honesty is a good policy, but it's not meant to be used as a weapon in our lives. Now, here's a stinking thinking that affects both passive-aggressive and passive-aggressive people. And that is, well, people should just be more considerate. And that's why I'm being passive, or that's why I'm being aggressive, or maybe passive-aggressive, is because you shouldn't have to be told. People shouldn't have to ask. They shouldn't need to be this way. And the fact is, we've got to really own up to this. People cannot read your mind. People don't know what you're thinking. And if you expect them to do that, well, can you hear it right now?
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart
I can hear the music playing, and we all know what this is too. This is a Disney World view of life. This is not the world we live in. Sitting around thinking the world should just read your mind and go along with your wishes without questioning you, that's unrealistic. That's a fantasy land. That's not the world we live in. People cannot read your minds. Few people will even try. There's very few people that even want to read your mind. They're off on their own adventure in life, their own battle in life. They oftentimes aren't even thinking about you. And as we said, the author says this. He says, isn't it a bit inconsiderate to make them guess what we want when we could just speak up and tell them? You are really respecting someone else when you tell them what you think, and you're not making them guess. Making them guess is really being inconsiderate. It's being disrespectful of someone to make them guess at those types of things. How about this one? I'm afraid of trying to be assertive and failing. Well, let's just clear this one out. You will fail. This isn't about perfection. We've talked about this numerous times. You are going to fail. Assertiveness is learning a new way of communication. It's going to take some learning. It's going to take some failures. And learning from those failures is going to take some time. Some people will latch on to these styles of communication faster than others, but it's not a race. It's a matter of adopting a new style of communication that is respectful of everyone involved. The author says this in the book. He says, no one becomes assertive. They just learn to use the skills more effectively. No matter how little you presently use the assertive style, you can learn to use it more often. Expect a few valuable failures, sometimes called learning experiences, along the way. If you never fail, well, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Okay, so what do we do with all of this in summary? And this has been a much longer episode than I originally thought it would be. So thank you for your patience and sticking around with me if you're still listening to me. But what do we do with this? Well, again, I would recommend you go back and listen to episode number 2 when we talk about stinking thinking. But basically, you've got to start challenging, and we're going to talk about this more in the coming weeks, but you've got to start challenging these thoughts. You first need to be aware of these thoughts. So acknowledging these thoughts, knowing that they're there, is a huge first step. You've got to start looking for these and looking for what you believe. And this is why I said at the beginning of the episode, what is your paradigm in life? What's your worldview? How do you view yourself? What are some of the things that you think about when you think about being assertive, either passively or aggressively? What are you thinking about when you do that? You need to, first of all, know what those are. They may be some of the things I mentioned today. Some of these may have really resonated with you because you think that's exactly what I think. I may not have mentioned what you think, but maybe it has inspired you today to realize, oh, this is kind of what I think. I would love to know if there's a really dominant thought that you have that leads you toward a passive or aggressive style of communication, and I didn't mention it. Would love to know about it. So please let me know if we didn't cover it today. But you need to, first of all, know what you're thinking. And then secondly, you need to challenge what you're thinking and replace it with what you know to be true. So the author mentions this. He says, you might counter fears of being assertive by saying to yourself, being unassertive has done more damage to my relationships than being assertive ever could. See, he's challenging his thoughts. He's saying, okay, I'm thinking this, but really, this is much worse. Or he says, you might counter the idea that aggression gets things done by saying this, aggression has also driven a lot of people away. Assertiveness will let me get things done with less resentment. You are challenging your thoughts, and you're replacing thoughts with truth or with where you want to go in life. And you're realizing, I could do this, I could be passive, but here's what's going to happen. I'm not really respecting this person. I'm not really caring for this person. I'm not engaging with this person. And then you choose what you're going to do. And we're going to talk more about this in the next few weeks. But this is where you want to start. And in fact, this could be your homework for the week. Go out this week and try to catch a belief that you keep thinking about being passive or aggressive or passive-aggressive. Try to discover one thing that you're thinking. If you're a passive-aggressive person, what are you thinking when you are passive-aggressive? What is the belief? What is the paradigm? What is the worldview that you hold? What is it? And that's your homework this next week. Go out and try to figure out at least one thing that you are thinking, your thoughts, your belief, that is leading you toward a more passive or passive-aggressive communication style. And if you want a little bit of extra credit, then try out replacing that thought with an alternative that you feel good about in your life. And quite honestly, it may feel very weird. It may sound kind of false when you replace that thought because you think, well, the other one seems to be more natural for me, but keep with it. Eventually, if you keep doing this, it will become part of your dominant communication style. And that old belief will start disappearing or fading off in the distance. This new belief will actually become a part of your communication style to other people. Well, that wraps up this episode of our belief systems that can thwart our assertiveness communication style. And wow, I just am astonished I went this long. There's a lot in this chapter. There's a lot of stuff I really thought we needed to get out. So again, thank you for your patience and hanging around for a very long episode. I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have, please leave me a comment at firstthingsproductivity.com/34. That is the webpage for this particular episode. Would love to hear from you. Would love to get any feedback from you on Twitter, on Facebook, on the places that you listen to me at, like Stitcher or iTunes. I would just love to hear from you, and please do so. So until next time, remember this. You are what you choose today, not what you've chosen before. So embrace today with passion and intention, and don't allow your thoughts to dictate you toward negative images of yourself and inefficient living. There is an assertive style that is not aggressiveness, and passive communication styles can learn to deal in this assertive style of communication. Aggressive styles of communication can learn to deal with this assertive style of communication. And your relationships will be better off, you will be better off, and you will find a level of happiness in your life you have not known before. So don't allow your thoughts to dictate you any longer. Look at what you're thinking, look at what you're believing, challenge those thoughts, and replace them with where you want to be and who you want to be in this life. Again, embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.